Oi oi, it's your boy Jack Slack, House Tricks. And it's been a little while since we did one of these because I reached, what was it, Thursday last week, and I was still rushing to get the primer out. So if you didn't see it, the primer Old Dogs, which was the massive video and text piece that I put out about George St. Pierre versus Michael Bisping as a preview, that came out on like Friday night. So you got about 6 hours to read it / watch it. But also the videos from it went up on my YouTube channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, click over and watch those because they're bloody good. The Michael Bisping one more so because I put more time into that. Sort of the GSP one was coming up to the deadline. But I think next time I do one of those, I'm going to try and schedule it better. So I'm already at work on my next one. And I won't announce it so far in advance, even though I do love putting together a hilarious teaser trailer. That's how Marvel cut their movies, or DC cut their movies nowadays. You make the trailer, and then you decide what the tone of the movie is going to be. Or in the case of Suicide Squad, you make a trailer, it does so well that you ask the trailer house who've never cut a film before to make an edit of your film. But what a terrific weekend of fights. Someone said to me on Reddit, is this going to be the first time you open with, that may be, the first time you don't open with, that may have been the worst pay-per-view ever? Yeah, that was a really good pay-per-view. I fucking loved it. I wrote this in my article, but everyone from the start knew that GSP versus Bisping was a cash grab. Like, if you're under the illusion that GSP won, that actually proved that he's the best middleweight in the world, you're living on cloud cuckoo land. Bisping should have stopped being considered the best middleweight in the world when he ducked all the contenders and fought Dan Henderson, the fossilized Dan Henderson. But that fight. Well, firstly, what they did was they stacked the card with fights that actual fight fans will care about. A lot of the time when you see these sort of desperate attempts to get people who cared back in 2011 back in, a lot of the times guys don't bother with the rest of the card. However, the card was really good from like a hardcore sense. You had 3 title fights, which is obscene, and you had... you had Wonder Boy versus Masvidal, which is one for all the fans, the guys who love the strategic striking matches. You had Joe Duffy and James Vick in terms of like prospects and stuff. You had, you just had all these fights that made sense and were really, really exciting too. And then you put in 2 title fights that were really relevant and exciting. And then you put in this, junk food, a main event, basically. It was a feel-good main event in terms of the matchup. It wasn't expected to be a great main event in terms of action, and then it turned out to be a great main event in terms of action too. So, people got super mad at me on Reddit when I was like, glad he got his money and they put on a decent fight. Because people were like, oh, well, tell that to Bobby Whittaker. And I'm like, Bobby Whittaker is my favourite fighter in the game today. I think, as a technical all-rounder, if I were going to show any fighter to a young trainee, a lot of people would say Demetrius Johnson, but I think Demetrius Johnson benefits a lot from being Demetrius Johnson. But if you wanted to show a young trainee like a perfectly rounded skill set to deal with guys with much better skills in every area, I would say Bobby Whittaker and Frankie Edgar would be my go-tos. Just all around. Tricks in every area to make up for a lack of pedigree in that area, or a lifetime of competing in that area. But yeah, so I'm glad that they put on an awesome fight after that, and it was really good to see GSP back. Like, if this brings in the millions of pay-per-view buy, or the million pay-per-view buys that they want, I think it'll be worth it. I mean, as much as I shit on them for doing daft stuff, it is clear that like the actual best fights available, like Yoel Romero versus Robert Whittaker for the interim title, that didn't draw shit. It takes time and exposure to make guys into draws, and you can't expose people to someone if they're not watching the event anyway. So, if you need to bring in these guys from 2011 or whatever to get eyes on it, fair enough. If you want to put a fake title on it or whatever, but there is a limit to that. When I'm watching Ken Shamrock versus Royce Gracie 3, I'm thinking, who the fuck is watching this? But, you have to sort of accept the business moves along with the sporting moves. While I was watching this, I was thinking, because Bobby Whittaker sat ringside and he is basically the actual world champion. I was thinking this was a lot like Bobby Fischer versus Spassky in like the 1990s. They did like an alternate world championship, and while everyone else was playing at the world championship, they were like, no, this is the real world championship, something like 30 years removed from their first meeting. And everyone was going, well, you guys are doing good chess, but you're not the best in the world, really. Especially as Bobby Fischer had been missing for like 30 years. But in this case, GSP had only been missing for 4 years, and to the best of my knowledge, hasn't spouted any bizarre anti-Semitic rhetoric or been detained in Japan. Bobby Fischer versus the World. Go watch that documentary on Netflix. It's brilliant. Or the weird Tobey Maguire biopic about him, which wasn't as good. So I thought, fuck it with regards to news today, because as you can tell already, I'm just foaming at the mouth to start talking about the UFC 217. I would recommend before listening to this, you go read the primer, because that's all the stuff I had in mind before the fight, and then a lot of those expectations were changed, by the fight, or rather subverted by the fight, and a lot of the things that we talked about did come up in the fight. So if you watch and read that first, I'll look smarter in the long run. Also, it took a lot of time to do, but we'll go straight down the 217 card. Shall we go bottom to top, actually? Because it's very rare that I bother watching all the prelims, unless someone says that they're amazing, and then I watch all of them. But this card, bottom to top, loved it. Really weird, some of the finishes. I thought there were 2 DQs, because I got lost in all the silliness after the Blades Olenek fight. To be fair, that stoppage makes even less sense then. What now? But then it turned out the Blades got a TKO doctor stoppage for the kick that they thought was it's very strange business, but I think that was something to do with the fact that if you used the replay, the fight had to end, which is a really daft rule. But again, I suppose when you're dealing with a sport of stamina and stuff like that, if you're stopping to watch all the replays, then it does have an effect on the fight. Very strange business, but they talked about that, when they started the broadcast. They were like, that's very strange, and then it almost immediately happened. But jerking the curtain was Ricardo Ramos versus Ayman Zahabi. And I was just thinking, like, watching the night of fights, nothing sums up how strange this sport is as if you think of Firas Zahabi's experience during the night. So what happened? He watched his brother suffer it was a pretty grisly knockout, and his first loss and his first knockout loss, right at the start of the show. Then he comes out and corners Joe Duffy through a really good performance, but then Joe Duffy gets starched. And then he has to come out again and get his head in the zone to corner George St. Pierre in the main event. And then George St. Pierre makes history. And apparently after the card ended, where they were moving people out of the arena, and St. Pierre and his team were still in the cage, like soaking it in. What an emotional roller coaster for that guy, eh? That really sums up the fight business in a nutshell. It's all these, just, even though it's on the world stage, it's these people who are all interconnected, and it's all the same people coming out for each fight. You're cornering against the same dudes every other event, But I thought this fight was really interesting, and this was one of those ones where if you watch the prelims, you normally either get old guys on their way out or new guys on their way in. And the new guys on the way in can be like, he's not really got it all together yet. Or they can be like, Christ, the action here is really good. And I was watching some of the scrambles in this fight were really slick. Some of the striking, to be fair, my eye is a lot better for striking than it is for grappling, but some of the striking looked a little bit herky-jerky at points. And the finish of this fight was the thing we were talking about Alexander Shlemenko doing the other week is spin once, miss. What will they, what's the last thing they'd expect after that? You spin again immediately for the same technique. And he did it almost 3 times in quick succession. Ramos, this is. He missed one, and then he missed another along the fence and immediately went into a second. And you can understand that because if the guy's missed the spinning back fist or whatever, you're then like, okay, let's capitalize on this. You're not thinking, yeah, he's going to keep spinning like a Beyblade and hit me in the head. And you saw that. I mean, Zahabi was caught cold with that, just straight to the floor. Looked, well, what was it? Joe Rogan said astral traveling. But then he said it twice on the same pay-per-view, so now it's going to be used all the time by every fan. But a cool phrase nonetheless. So I really enjoyed that fight. I made some notes from it, but I can't find my notebook. Shit. But yeah, I really liked some of the scrambles. There was a really nice little bit from Zahabi where he was defending the pass or consolidating side control, got the guy's head to the same side, and then did that little rock up and put in the near side hook. Marcelo Garcia / Gary Tonin favourite. There were lots of cool little moments that I really enjoyed. And then moments later, you get Curtis Blades versus Alexei Oleinik, and Oleinik is just... Oh, it was awful, but also really good. They described it as Fry versus Takayama, some of the bits in it, and it really was. They were just grabbing each other and going for the uppercuts. I quite like the vertical fist uppercut. That's just a personal preference thing, but Oleinik was using that, whereas Blades seemed to be looking for like a more traditional uppercut on the inside. I was watching it going, oh my god, I just remembered that Oleinik outstruck Travis Brown for periods of that fight. The guy hits hard, he's just really clumsy and has no polish on any of his techniques. He does not look like a guy who's been practicing fighting for the best part of 20 years or whatever it is. But that was a super weird finish. He goes for an obviously illegal kick as Oleinik's coming up hands and knees, clips his ear. But because they stopped the fight to watch the tape, they had to stop it. But because he only clipped the ear, it wasn't like a real foul. So it looked like... when I watched it, I was like, DQ, and then I carried on. I didn't really pay attention. But apparently, Curtis Blades got the TKO for doctor's stoppage. Very, very strange, but a really enjoyable fight up to that point. So when did it finish? Yeah, about 2 minutes into round 2. So yeah, I would recommend watching both these fights. Both of them get the Slacky seal of approval for not a shit prelim fight. Randy Brown versus Mickey Gall. Surprisingly enjoyable given how limited Mickey Gall is. I didn't know much about Randy Brown coming in, but everyone was on about how he didn't really have a ground game, and then he did okay on the ground. So, Mickey Gall kind of gets on my tits, if I'm honest, but it was a decent fight. Mickey Gall's striking does look horrible, though. And that's just something that needs time, and that would be time that he would have in the lower, the lower leagues and the smaller shows, but isn't getting here because he's suddenly on the prelim card for the biggest event of the year. But he did beat Sage Northcutt, so he'll always be a boy, sort of, in that regard. Ovin Prue versus Corey Anderson. I could not bring myself to watch this all the way through, so I did just watch the head kick at the end. This is a fight that was made in a lab to bore me. I cannot stand watching either of these dudes. They might be great dudes. They've got a couple of great finishes each, but for some reason... Well, Ovin Prue very rarely throws a combination and almost always gasses after, round 1. But keeps Von Fluing dudes. I don't know what's going on there. Meanwhile, Corey Anderson is I was excited for him at one point, and then he lost to Geriatrics Shogun, and I was just like, oh, I cannot be bothered with this anymore. But the head kick was nice. Then he had Mark Godbeer versus Walt Harris. I conflated these two fights, the two heavyweight fights in my head, because I was like, fat black guy versus fat white guy. I was going, which one finished which way? Now, this was the one where Walt Harris kneed him in the dick, and then as the ref saying, stop, 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 or time, or whatever it is, and literally getting between them, he kicks around the referee to kick Godbeer in the head. And then gets DQ'd and is like, what? I thought this was America. Hilarious, just watching him try and justify illegally kicking the guy while the other guy's shouting at him. Even Mark Hamill, whichever one's not in Star Wars, whichever one's not the hairdresser in space. He used to, he was deaf, and he never hit anyone after the bell because he recognised when the referee was jumping between them. Just incredible. But I do. It's quite nice to have just these ludicrous finishes on a card, especially in the prelim portion. If that had happened in one of the title fights, yeah, I'd be furious. But if you're going out for a night out and you're going to watch a load of fights and some of them just end in the most ridiculous bullshit ways possible, that's quite fun. Someone was telling me that this was their first live event, and they had a wonderful time, and I was just like, give up now. Fandom's over. You're never going to go to another event and not feel disappointed if you started with this one. Then James Vick versus Joe Duffy. I really enjoyed that. Joe Duffy, I am used to being a fairly long lightweight. He's one of those fighters that I really enjoy watching. Just puts together nice combinations, setups. Everything he does in the cage seems to be to subvert expectations for something else. He'll throw a crazy axe kick and then he'll get back to trying to find your body or make you lean into a left hook or something like that. Nice jab, really good boxing for an MMA fighter. They keep touting his professional boxing career. I mean, he exclusively fought bums because that was the idea. If you've got a little bit of promise, they'll put you in with bums to try and pad your record up. But obviously all that time training with very good boxers has helped him. James Vick, meanwhile, is fucking gigantic. We were talking about how Donald Cerrone is a giant as a 6-foot-tall lightweight. And guys are still punching up at him at welterweight. But 6'3" for a lightweight. That says to me that you are going to have some kidney stones in your life if you keep up that weight cut. I know he's a very gangly guy and not like a giant guy, but that's like George Roop-esque in terms of height to weight class ratio. I really liked what Duffy was doing at points in this fight. Putting Vick along the fence and working his hands, doing some nice kicking. Threw an axe kick at one point. Again, love that shit. You got to be confident to do that. And then Vick catches him with his uppercut as he's leaning in. It was 1 second left to go in the round. Just crazy. But yeah, no, Vick didn't look bad through the fight. I just really like what Joe Duffy was doing, and I totally didn't expect that knockout to just sort of come out of nowhere. Then he had Paulo Costa. Is he Berrezinho? No, what is he? Borrachinho? Yeah, Borrachinho. The Eraser, apparently. Okay. But he was fighting Johnny Hendricks. I am so bored of seeing Johnny Hendricks fight. I actually got a little teary when I saw him surprise himself and make weight. If you didn't see this video before the fight, at the weigh-ins, he announced to the press, before he even got on the scale, he was like, I want you to know, I thought my underwear weighed nothing. It turns out my underwear has betrayed me. My underwear weighs upwards of 2 kilos or some shit like that. And because it's matted with lice and pubes. But he just goes on and on about this underwear, then weighs in naked, and actually makes weight and is surprised. And I actually got a little bit teary seeing him make weight. I was like, well done, Johnny. But he can't fight anymore. He's not got what he had. I was watching his GSP fight in the lead up to the GSP fight. This GSP fight, that is. And that one and the Campman one and all the other ones from that sort of period, he was so quick getting across the floor because he's a short guy, even at welterweight. But guys would throw a kick at him or something like that, and he would be on them before their foot came down. So quick getting in, and then he'd be swinging hands. He wasn't a great striker, technically, but he could close that distance so fast. And watching him, firstly against this gigantic opponent, with capped delts, which we'll talk about in a second, but against this gigantic middleweight, he could not close that distance at all, and he also looked slow as shit when he was trying to close that distance. He had a couple of moments where he did manage to get in on the guy, but it seemed largely because the guy was kicking so much and just really didn't regard him very highly at all. And he looks really sad now, Johnny Hendricks, because he's getting in the ring and he's fat. You're looking at him going, this guy is not in peak condition for an athlete. And he's putting his brain on the line while he's doing it. He seems like a man who knows he should be better than this, but can't find it in him to do what it takes to be better than this. And also he slowed down a lot, like I said, and the power sort of disappeared magically after advanced testing came in. But, that's an IV ban. The IV ban really did a number on Hendricks. Hendricks, Weidman, guys like that, guys who were very big, suddenly they had to either lose muscle mass or go up a weight class when really they shouldn't be in that upper weight class. So rough night for Johnny Hendricks, just gets beat up. I mean, I'm not going to tell you all the technical aspects of that because it was just an ass whooping. The guy was just punting him in the arm, in the body, and Hendricks could do nothing about it. Someone asked me what I thought about the whole USADA thing with Paulo Costa. Apparently, he's just listed under 2 names on the USADA website. He has actually been tested twice by them. The thing I always have is that a lot of these guys, especially from Brazil, people get super mad if you say it, but some guy was like, Jack Slack is biased against anyone who's not, or biased to British fighters. They do roids too, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I'm not saying they don't, but if Winstrel was available at Boots, I think I'd be a lot more inclined to be on British fighters' case. You can buy Winstrel over the counter in Brazil. That's the dirty secret of how they get the amazing booties. But there's always on these cards, or especially on Brazilian cards, there'll be a couple of new guys or guys who've had like one fight in the UFC, and they will look gigantic, and they'll have the capped delts, and you're looking at them going, and the commentators are going, yeah, he's a big stocky dude, and you're going, but a lot of these guys, I just say give it 18 months, because the thing about any sort of performance enhancing or muscle building or cardio building or whatever kind of drug, especially steroids and things like that, but any kind of performance enhancing drug, you do them for the benefits in training. You don't do them for the benefits in fights. Even back in the days of commission only testing, the commission only testing basically makes sure that you don't turn up with a needle sticking out your butt. If you're coming into a fight roided to the gills, and having those strength benefits or whatever in the fight, that's one thing. But what the point of most performance enhancing drug use is to get in a great training camp, make huge strength and endurance gains during that time, and then you cycle off the drugs and you've still got massive amounts of strength and endurance that you wouldn't have otherwise built. Generally, I would say give a guy 18 months under enhanced testing, and either you will see what their real physique is like, or they will really be taking risks with the random testing. Because the whole thing about random testing is that that's the threat. There are things that you can cycle out of your body in like a few days, but by having the tests actually random, you are always running that risk whenever you take something. So typically, guys, you will see guys deflate a little bit after a year and a half of testing. It's not an immediate thing. You're not going to get in the UFC with the 4-month testing pool and your first fight there, you're suddenly much, much smaller. Unless you're fighting in places that literally don't test to begin with, like on an Indian reservation. I actually looked into how much it would cost me to host a night of fights on an Indian reservation, just out of interest. You pay $4,000 to whoever owns the casino, and then that's it, carte blanche. If I want to just put up a ring and have guys do a Japanese death match or something, I can. That's $4,000, by the way, not £4,000. Anyway, on to the next fight after all that talk about steroids. Again, I'm quite excited to see this guy in with good guys. Paulo Costa, what's his name? Barrachinha. The Eraserhead. I want to see Eraserhead in with good guys. Obviously, he knocked out Bang Bose in his last fight, or Bang Bose. Gareth McClellan in his UFC debut. 3 knockouts in as many UFC fights. In fact, he's knocked out everyone in his career except for one opponent who he rear naked choked, which I haven't seen that fight. The rear naked choke is essentially the knockout of the ground, because there's so many ways you can get there. You could, methodically pressure pass your way through, or more likely, you knock a dude down, he gives you his back, you choke him. And that's where most rear naked chokes come from nowadays. But equally, only 3 of his opponents have wiki pages. Everyone else, it's the Henan Barao record, where he's got 8 dudes with no Wikipedia page in jungle fights. So keep an eye on him, but don't buy the hype just yet. Then you had Stephen Thompson versus Jorge Masvidal. was really psyched for this fight, was going to write something about it, but I ran out of time because I had to finish the primer. I did write 3 articles this week, which is a lot to get through, as well as the primer. I'm going to try and keep it like a nice high work rate. If Vice don't want anything, I'll just write something for fightprimer.com, which I'm now putting all my articles, or links to all my articles, everywhere on, so you can check that out. But I didn't get around to writing about this fight, so that was the point of that story. I really enjoyed this, though. I thought Stephen Thompson's hands looked really good. They still have that like flappy karate feel. You know, the hands are coming back to the chest, and his head's very high, and you're like, oh, if he gets hooked while he's doing one of these. And he did at several points. But he was so good getting in and out. And, confusing Masvidal. Lots of feints, lots of movement. He hit that lovely right hand into dart, into stance switch sidekick. A couple of times. He did that against Rory McDonald. I love that. It's where he goes to his orthodox stance. He throws the right hand while darting out to his left. And so he's in like a horse stance, facing his opponent from their right side or whatever. So he gets off to 90 degrees and he's in the opposite stance side on. And then as the opponent turns to face him, he hits him with the sidekick. It's gorgeous. It's probably, if you were someone who didn't have very quick feet to like pick up the sidekick right from the stance. And of course, if you're fighting in like a more squared stance, sidekicking on the lead leg almost off the table. You have to fight that sort of side on, and then you do expose yourself to low kicks and things like that. But if you are a guy who wants to land sidekicks but doesn't have that stance, and that's a really nice way to do it. You throw the dart, you have them turn towards you, and then you throw the sidekick. Another nice way to do it, which I've seen Holly Holm and Michael Chandler do, is if you're against someone in a open guard matchup, you let them circle past your lead foot. So, like, you know, as people generally, especially in MMA where guys are just like drilled, circle past the lead foot constantly and they will just run past it, rather than like just trying to get just outside it and shoot straight down the center or something like that. But guys will circle past that lead foot, and if you bring your back foot in to like make a little T with your lead foot, and then you throw the sidekick off at that angle to where they now are, that's a really nice way. So you weren't in a bladed stance, but their movement put you on a line with them, or your feet on a line with them. This would be a lot easier with GIFs, but I might try and include some in the show notes on fightprimer.com. But yeah, there's a couple of nice ways to land sidekicks if you don't have that side-on stance. Stephen Thompson does have that side-on stance, and he landed some nice Bill Wallace ones, the backhanded jab, step up into the sidekick. Really nice to see him sidekicking so much. He doesn't really do it a lot, and I think that would be a real game changer if he could do it more. Masvidal was a bit more of a mark for it because he has the high guard and the light lead leg, so he's constantly like very tall, but his midriff is sort of exposed. You also saw Thompson use the right straight to the body and the left straight to the body quite a lot. The one thing about that very side-on stance is that if you get your leg stamped on in low-line sidekick or front kick style, you are getting lateral pressure on your knee as opposed to straight forward and back bend. You're getting it on the side, which is really bad for your joints. McGregor Diaz 1, there is a side kick right onto Diaz's turned in lead leg, and it just goes like straight, almost bends in half sideways. It's awful. I'm dreading when one of those actually happens and it is like a blowout. Mark Jacasey MCL'd his man in either his last fight or the one before that. The one where he sidekicked the guy in the leg, the guy very clearly changed attitude and ran at him and got counterpunched. The change in attitude was because he'd been kicked in the knee and his MCL apparently tore. So whenever someone says like those kicks don't cause injuries, they do. I'm not of the opinion that they should be illegal, but you can't argue that they don't cause injuries because they do. At a higher rate than like low, outside low kicks of the Thai variety do. Another note to make, actually, a couple more of those low, very low, low, or low, low kicks going in, just below the knee. I think guys are getting better at checking, which is why the kick has come in. But I think you're going to need to see guys either bounce back out of range, a la Rose Namajuna, which we'll get onto in a minute, or retract the lead leg, a la Darren Till or Sanshai or any other great Thai fighter, or Malapet. I don't know what his gym name is now. He's probably moved about 4 times since I remember it. But Malapet used to like a Czech where rather than pick the leg up and turn it out, he would just bend his heel back towards him, or bring his heel up off the ground back towards himself and turn his knee out without lifting the leg. Which I suppose could be used, because the thing you don't want to do is pick your leg up and just get punted in the lower portion of the shin and ankle anyway. It's interesting. We'll see how that plays out in future. But, someone will come up with some better answers to it, because otherwise people will just keep doing it with no repercussions at all. The droppage that happened in this fight, Thompson dropped Masvidal, which I did not see coming. I thought this would be a very conservative fight. But Thompson actually stepped up and attacked a lot in this fight. But the dropping punch, or the knockdown rather, Thompson likes to stand in the southpaw stance and then do that fade back counter, or he'll fade back into the left. He'll go back into the left as the opponent comes in, trying to stretch out that right hand and come in over the open side. This time he was orthodox, and he went back into the right and came in over the shoulder. The shoulder, especially for a guy as good at hiding behind his shoulders and elbows as Masvidal, can be a lot harder to fire over and catch him clean, but he timed it really well and caught him. So that was really nice. I thought Masvidal did a good job when he grabbed the single and came up punching. That's something that I saw Matt Brown do to, who was it a while ago? I think it was that Robbie Lawler fight where he was having real trouble getting in because Robbie Lawler hit him as hard as he could with a counter very early on. And obviously Matt Brown's whole game has been like get in people's faces and tire them out. And if you have that hesitation about getting in people's faces, that's all time where you're not doing what you need to be doing within that time. So the few moments of success that he had was he grabbed the front leg, came up and punched Lawler in the face as Lawler was like trying to kick his leg to the ground and quarter Nelson or whatever it was to get his leg free. Masvidal had good success with that. I mean, I've been advocating that for quite a while for guys who are having trouble with these really elusive fighters. Just grab a hold of them, push them to the fence, and then as they break free or as you break free, you've got that fence to their back in a way that you would have had to cut the ring for. If you don't have good ring cutting, just run in and fall chest to chest with them. Or shoot and come up, but obviously that's a little bit more tiring. But yeah, really good showing for Stephen Thompson. Made a great... I don't think you're going to see him back in the title picture for a little while yet. I mean, no one wants to see him fight Tyron Woodley. Someone was asking me after this GSP fight, who would you like to see, Tyron Woodley versus GSP? And I was like, God, if they fought for the middleweight title and Woodley won, Woodley with 2 titles would be the worst thing to ever happen in the UFC. I mean, I like him, but... And he often has some very interesting things to say about like fight promotion and things like that, but a lot of his fights are either quick knockouts or boring. Oh dear. And I can't see him being a big draw. Like, I'm looking at his buy rates for events he's been on. They haven't been like superb unless he's had someone else with him. But then Nick Diaz is going to be coming back into demand now because you got Tyron Woodley with need of a good fight, and you've got Michael Bisping with need of a retirement fight, or at least something to capitalize on his star power. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Rose Namajuna versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk. If you have not read the article, How Rose Namajuna Killed the Queen. Yeah, I got Vice to give me back my old titles. I quite enjoyed that one. It's a classic, and every Reddit thread is just by punching her in the face, and everyone thinks that they're super original. They can't see like the 8 other comments below them. But, it's typically that, and then the other comment is, Queen, she only defended her title. But that didn't happen this time, because Joanna Jędrzejczyk actually a long-serving champion, which is getting very rare, and which is part of the reason I stopped doing Killing the Kings, because, you don't want to hear... It's not really interesting unless people are building them up as unbeatable. Like, if I write something about Anderson Silva and then people go like, oh, that's nonsense, he's unbeatable, and then he loses, that's really exciting. Or Hedon Barrow or whoever, but or Ronda Rousey. But, it's no fun writing, like, Killing the King, Cody Garbrandt, and then people are like, well, he's had 1 title fight. There's not a lot we know about him. And to be fair, I conceded that in my pre-fight article for that fight. I mean, Cody Garbrandt is still largely unknown because he starched a lot of people quickly, and then he fought completely differently in the one fight that was, like, big. Anyway, back to Namajunas versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk. I loved this performance. The moment that I loved this performance was in the first. Well, it was spoiler alert. Didn't go past the first round, but the moment that I fell in love with this fight, or the fight that Namajunas was fighting, was when she, like in the opening seconds, she walks in on Joanna, bounces back a bit, moves in again, bounces back, feints. Joanna flicks out that wicked jab of hers, misses. And Namajunas immediately hammers in the low kick in the back of the leg, which is exposed by that jab. Loved it. And then she did it again. I was just like, this is going to be good. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, I said this in my pre-fight piece, Namajunas was a change of pace. If you look at the big three challengers, we're not talking about like Jessica Penne, because she did beat Rena. She beat Rena in a shootboxing match. But if you look at the really like scary people, or the real people we've given a chance against Joanna, it's been Claudia Gadelha, Jessica Andrade, and Karolina Kowalkiewicz. But those three are like in-your-face sort of fighters, hard-nosed people, take a lot of punishment, move forward. Namajunas, not as scary as any of those three fighters, but much more measured, works at a slower pace, works out at range. Jędrzejczyk has had this amazing work rate and accuracy because the people she's been fighting have been there the whole time, getting in her face and eating these jabs constantly. The stats on this fight are amazing. I didn't even realize how incredible these stats were until after. I was like, that was a beautiful performance, and then I got the fight metric up to compare, the work rate of each, because I thought, she did a great job of keeping a slower work rate, or a lower pace of fight rather. But if you get the fight metric up, Joanna Jędrzejczyk threw 45 strikes and landed 5. That's astonishing to have her swing in the air that much. And that just tells you what Namajunas was doing. The constant feints, the constant, I'm stepping in, no, I'm not actually. Just constantly like doing that and having Joanna swinging at shadows, as I put it in the post-fight article. She's throwing the inside low kick and missing. She's throwing the jab and missing. And then when she thinks she's safe to do something, suddenly Rose is right on top of her. And Jessica Andrade ran at Joanna Jędrzejczyk for 25 minutes and never caught her like flush. By lying so much about when she was actually going to step in. When Namajunas did step in, she caught her clean. So she caught her on one leg going for like an inside low kick and knocked her down, and that was a shocker. But the finish came on a feint into a left hook, but she feints about 5 times and then does a little bob down. Joanna reaches out with her right hand, I think to parry a jab, could have been trying to push her off or something like that, but the left hook comes up, turns her head right around. But the same thing had happened like 10 seconds before. Namajunas had feinted and come in with a left hook and a right. I'm going to apologise to Rose Namajunas because before this fight... Actually, no, I'm going to apologise to Karolina Kowalkiewicz because I was bagging on her last week for that awful gimme fight they gave her where she just pumped her fists and ran forward, and some crazy WMMA fans were like, oh, a world-class striker right there. But I'm going to apologise to her because she has a chin on her. Because I said, I'd have more chance... I would believe a lot more in Rose Namajunas' chances if she'd shown some serious hitting power, because she sets up these lovely right-hand counters and draws people onto them, and she sets up these nice 1-2s and things. She can catch people clean, but she doesn't seem to hurt them. And then I put up a load of GIFs on my article of her bouncing back away from Karolina and then cracking her with an overhand on the chin. And it looks like Namajunas is putting her whole body weight into it, but doesn't seem to do anything. But clearly she can hit decently enough because she knocked down and TKO'd Jędrzejczyk. So props to Karolina for taking those on the mush. I'm very interested in the rematch because I think, I don't like to do this whole underestimated thing, but I think the fight that Joanna fought was wrong for this opponent. What she needed to do was be the aggressor, go forward, pressure, use feints of her own, because when Namajunas, you'll notice she's got good management of distance, but it takes a lot of space to do that. She'll bounce straight back from an attack and then bounce right in. I think what you've got to do is try and use some of those reactions to get her towards the fence, and then there's no space to bounce backwards, and then you've got free access to that lead leg, you've got access to her body if you want to step in and bang it. Out of the gutter, people. But I think we know that body work really takes it out of Namajunas because she's a tall, skinny lass for that weight. But I've never seen a fighter tire so quickly from body work as her fight with Carolina. A couple of knees to the body, and suddenly her footwork was just much, much slower. Kicks to the legs will do that obviously too. But I think you've got to bring the pressure, and you've got to fight offensively with a defensive mindset against Jędrzejczyk. I don't think you can wait for her to come to you, because she's going to lie about it. She's going to tell you she's turning up at 11 and then not turn up to like 1:30 and bring Pat Barry, and he's going to ruin your house. But flashbacks to bad parties there, sorry. But I think that's the way you've got to fight Namajunas if you're Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And Joanna Jędrzejczyk is good from the clinch too. I mean, she got knocked down, and Namajunas got on top of her. Namajunas, very good ground game, very good submission game. Jędrzejczyk just bounces up. Like, you're not going to wrestle her to the mat and hold her there. She's very strong in the clinch, very strong getting up off the ground. And of course, her gas tank is phenomenal. So, like, the kind of fight that favours her is not the one that Rose Namajuna put her in. But yeah, no, not taking anything away from Rose Namajunas, just thinking about the possibility of a rematch. Because, with a long-serving champion, it's a lot more common, especially with a quick knockout, for the UFC to sign that sort of fight. Interesting though, because like Namajunas put on the perfect fight for Jędrzejczyk, and turned out that all the things that were unique about her style were things that troubled Jędrzejczyk. But now you match her up in your head with like the other top three, and I can see her having a really hard time with all three of them. It's fighters like this and fights like this that really mess with the simplistic perception of fighting. People like a champion to be at the top and everyone else to be very clearly under them. That's why they like Anderson Silva, GSP, people like that, because you can go like, yeah. That's why they don't like people like Michael Bisping, because if you knock out the champion, but you've already got a ton of losses on your record, and everyone knows that there are plenty of ways that you can lose, people have a hard time buying that. The unbeatable champion is a huge selling point in MMA. But yeah, good job, Trevor Whitman. I've been singing Trevor Whitman's praises for what he's turned Justin Gaethje into, but he's done a wonderful job with Rose Namajunas, because I had to watch her last few fights before this. And if you watch her like run through Tough and the fight against Esparza, she is just wild, getting by on aggression. I mean, her second fight, she gets into a clinch and immediately jumps onto her own head to do a flying armbar. Whereas now, the way she won this fight was by measured control of the pace and then exploiting that. She took control of the fight and the distance, and then she jumped in and cracked her lady. Did you hear me almost say cracked her man, and then I changed halfway through? It sounded really weird. But a more measured Namajunas is what we're seeing now. And she's only had a very short career so far, but the amount of change that she's put into her game in the last couple of fights is incredible. I think Andrade is a really hard matchup for her if she has to defend that title, like against Andrade before she fights Jędrzejczyk again, because that's someone who's going to keep coming forward, works the body a lot, slams girls all the time. Is going to try and run you onto the fence. Doesn't have good ring cutting, but will try. And she takes a shot like a monster. So I think that's going to be a really tough ask for Namajunas, but power to her, and power to her for keeping her hair short, because as a qualified MMA journalist, I'm in position to tell you that she is a banging hottie with long hair, which of course the UFC would love, but she's doing this whole Furiosa short hair thing, and they would love her to be like girl next door, marketable, because I think she's a lot prettier than Ronda Rousey, but she doesn't. She does her own thing, and I really respect that. Meanwhile, Paige Van Zandt, update on Paige Van Zandt, because we're not doing news today. She announced that she's going to be fighting the winner of the Tough 125 season, or whatever it is, which would, I believe, be the champion of that division. So she basically announced her own title shot, and the UFC have rushed to say, no, that's not happening. The co-main event, Cody Garbrandt versus TJ Dillashaw, I thought this really summed up everything about the sort of darting, shifting style, positively and negatively. TJ Dillashaw does a lot of things that in a close range boxing exchange with a tighter, crisper boxer, you're probably going to get you in trouble. The counter right hand that dropped him is a nice example of that. But equally, the exchange that ended the fight, like that, I mean, it was basically quick draw, but Dillashaw ended up entering on an orthodox stance and leaving on a southpaw stance with the southpaw right hook, which is just not something that you're going to encounter in an exchange very often. If you're a very traditional, clean-cut boxer like Garbrandt. I thought both men had their moments. I'm definitely not going to say that this was, TJ Dillashaw out hustling or outclassing Cody Garbrandt. I mean, it was a very close fight, and he just happened to get to his gun first in that exchange. There was a nice little setup though when he did second round, I believe it was, the high kick. He dropped in to attempt to take down the first time, showed it a second time. Third time he went down and came up with the left high kick. And Garbrandt's hands were nowhere near his head, so it worked perfectly. I'm going to have another look at that fight because I quite like to write something, a post-fight article about it for maybe the Fight Primer. But let's do the main event because that was awesome. Georges St. Pierre returns from 4 years absence to, fairly convincing victory. There were signs of slowing. There was definitely signs of him puffing near the end of the second round. Started to slow down, got caught with a couple of right hands on one leg. I mean, we talked about in the primer the step up inside low kick and how his has generally been better than Bisping's. Bisping tends to get his caught a lot because GSP tends to check the lead shoulder or the face with his hand when he kicks. Didn't do that, got caught with a right hand while on one leg. But everything we said about GSP's triple attack was there. The jab, the inside low kick, the step-up high kick, and all of that sets up the Superman jab, which we basically haven't seen in the 4 years that he's been absent. I mean, you could argue TJ Dillashaw's drop shift, but they're very different in application sort of techniques. Dillashaw never lands his punch, whereas the whole point of the Superman jab is for GSP to land his punch. And then he runs into the right low kick. It was gorgeous watching him do it. I mean, he stunned Bisping at the very end of the first round. He was looking for back kicks as Bisping circled. At the end of that first round, when he stunned Bisping, he glanced him with a wheel kick, which could have been, good night, Irene. He was looking for these long rear leg side kicks, and a Rose Namajuna sort of thing. And he landed a few, actually. And Bisping sort of looked at him like, yeah, fair enough. But you can't keep taking those. I mean, that's a heavy kick. That's the guy's full body weight put on you from behind him. So, it's something that it seemed like he was catching him because it is so unusual. But that would get old very quickly for the man taking it, I imagine. The jab was largely on point. Bisping, between the first and second round, Perillo goes, stay down on the right side, get behind that shoulder, keep down dipped to your right. And then he comes out the second round, starts jabbing with St. Pierre, and has a lot more success. We talked about this in the primer too, jabbing with the jabber. BJ Penn had success with it against GSP the first time. GSP got a lot better at hiding when he was going to jab, but he's still very lazy with that rear hand, and his head is normally in one spot when he does come in. So jabbing with him can lead to you getting the better of it. His right hand was up by the end. By the third round, he was there trying to check every jab as he stepped in. He was looking for the counter right hand across the top. In my post-fight article, I wrote that he was one of the few that paid the money to watch the Dan Henderson fight because he was trying to time the counter right hand after the jab, just like Dan Henderson. And that is something that we talked about in the Bisping portion of the primer. I assembled all those clips of him jabbing in the video. People getting butthurt about me putting in the Anderson Silva fight. The Anderson Silva fight is a phenomenal fight to look at. Why Bisping was successful it says a lot about Anderson Silva's success. If you compare someone like Yushin Okami or anyone that he counterpunched basically to what Bisping was doing, feinting, staying on top of his feet, not leading with his face, being non-committal, if you compare any of that to any of the opponents that Silva knocked out, it's clear why Michael Bisping boxed him up for large portions of that fight. But people are so tied up in, no, he didn't, he knocked him out, and then got boxed up for 2 rounds after he knocked him out. But people are so tied up in, who won, which honestly don't care about. I just like winding up Silva fanboys. Rather than why Bisping had so much success. You could claim that Anderson Silva slowed down or lost his chin, but he was timing his counters to when Bisping was stepping in. He just wasn't finding him. And that was due to Bisping being down behind his shoulders in correct position and feinting, making Silva reluctant to throw the counters. But, the portion of the audience that I'm addressing there, that's not going to get through to anyway. They just want to be like, oh, he definitely knocked him out. Okay, cool, he knocked him out. But in the 3 rounds up to that point, he was still getting boxed up for a reason, which we're now talking about. Bisping has this thing. I said it in the primer. He's a guy who is in a constant fight between his instincts, which are like pull the head straight back, chin up in the air, turn away from shots, and his science, which is get down behind the shoulders, feint, always be in position to deal with an exchange. And that's what makes him such a fascinating character to me. He didn't luck into any of this. He didn't, he lucked into the timing on the title shot, but I mean, he didn't, there's nothing about him, aside from his astounding cardio, he wasn't naturally a brilliant striker. He didn't have amazing timing and all that. He's learned all this the hard way. And it still is a struggle for him to stay on point a lot of the time. And the Silva fight's especially brilliant because he does it, in a very dangerous situation for the best part of 5 rounds. With a couple of mistakes that do get him caught, including the dialogue with the referee, which I brought up because I watched a load of his fights and he does jaw-jack with the referee constantly, and it got him to trouble in the Silva fight, obviously. But in this fight, the first time St. Pierre takes him down, the moment he hits the mat, he's talking to the referee about how GSP is stalling. In fairness, as soon as GSP moved, he did get up and break free. But just classic Bisping, can't stop, just... I'm making the mouth sign with my hand, giving it all this, but you can't see that. But I just love that about him. He's just incorrigible. So St. Pierre was looking for this counter right over the top, but Bisping, after the first round, he was down behind his shoulder every time. You can watch him jabbing in the first round, and then his jabbing form in the second round, and they're completely different. And by the third round, St. Pierre's sending himself off balance, missing these counters. And then he steps in for a shot or a duck at the hips and comes up with the left hook and knocks Bisping on his ass and follows up with a rear naked choke, which was gorgeous. Hasn't finished that since 2005. That was what we were talking about in the primer. We said that some guys give up their back to Bisping to St. Pierre, to GSP, and they end up not really. They get a break because he takes the back, they roll on top because the back is a position where unless you flatten them down face down, you're basically giving up gravity advantage. You're going to the bottom to try and choke them, so you lose all your strikes basically. And St. Pierre works a phenomenal pace on top, and by giving up your back to him, basically you've locked him into a hand fight where he's not hurting you. Alves, Diaz, I think Hardy gave up their back and didn't really, they lost the round, but they weren't getting hit the entire time, and they certainly weren't finished. We also talked about how important the turtle is and keeping the crossface off when GSP gets to half guard. Bisping conceded the crossface quite quickly, but he did also look for that octopus underhook or reverse underhook get up, and that worked for him actually. It worked for Thiago Alves a couple of times too. Worked for Gary Tonin against Buchecha, which tells you that it's a pretty solid technique if you can get it, or it's certainly a method for making a scramble if you're good at it. Bisping's bottom game, though, was really good. I mean, St. Pierre was looking for the can opener, and people were talking about that being a major part of the size difference. Bisping's head is further back and stuff. But Bisping was putting his feet on the hips, keeping GSP away, and he was stiff-arming GSP's face away. And because GSP likes to keep his head low while he's getting his inside control or when he's stacking up to try and pass, he keeps his head low. But if you push it away and then you let it go, it's going to come back in. So that's when Bisping was slashing him up with elbows. And GSP's weight is providing all the force for that impact. There are two sort of good elbows from the bottom. One is the overhead one because you can bring it down with some force. Let's see Tony Ferguson versus Kevin Lee. And the other one is letting them drop onto the elbow because they are providing the weight for it. And he cut him to ribbons with that. I mean, they're both very fair-skinned fighters who get cut quite easily. But that was pretty gnarly. No one's done that from the bottom against GSP ever. So, a really good main event. Can't complain at all. Loved it. Don't think GSP will be able to defend that title against the top middleweights in the world. But, I mean, I'm more than willing to watch him try. I'd love to see him go back to welterweight. His teammate Rory McDonald basically showed the game plan to beat Tyron Woodley. And I've not seen anything out of... I mean, this isn't just trash Woodley Day. He is a very, very good fighter. But I've not seen a huge difference in his method to what he was trying to do when he fought Rory McDonald, standing on the fence and then coming off it, swinging or ducking onto takedowns. So that could be interesting. Shit, I've just talked myself into a Tyron Woodley versus GSP matchup when I said I wouldn't. Anyway, that was an amazing event. We talked about it for a fucking hour. Sorry about that, guys. We'll do a couple of questions, and then in terms of previews, there's some great fights and fighters on this next Fight Night card, but I think I'll probably try and write something for Vice about that, rather than eat up another hour of your time here. Hey Jack, what are the non-physical attributes for to make a great/successful fighter? From Evelyn. The fight game's a physical game, but you're basically a coach is looking for a fighter who is a conduit for what they're talking about, for what they're telling them to do. A Carlos conduit, if you will. So what you want is someone who can follow instructions and someone who can stay on task even when they're hurt. And that's the hardest thing in the world. Like the discipline to do the right thing, or to keep doing the things that you've practiced, even when you're tired, even when you're hurt. Those are the things that break. Basically, every fighter's discipline breaks down once he starts getting tired. It's the later that comes, the better they do overall. Like if you watch Manny Pacquiao, he'll blister in with a combination, step out the side door, perfect stuff, but almost impossible to keep up for a good length of time. And he was able to keep it up round after round after round. And of course, he did get reckless at some times, but the number of exchanges he was winning just by sticking to the science of it, through his mental durability and ability to stay on focus while fatigued. We could talk about chin and cardio and stuff like that, but I think discipline is the biggest thing of all. And that's not, discipline is getting on the road in the morning to do the road work and things like that, but discipline under fire is probably the most valuable attribute among fighters who are already good. I've got another short one here, so I'll do that. Hey Jack, the best strikers nowadays seem to feint and double jab. What is the answer to these moves? Best Andrew. And the subject line for that email was counters to double jabs and feints. You can't counter a double jab. Well, you can counter a double jab. You can't counter a feint. That's the genius of it. If you're feinting well, you're in position to deal with whatever comes back. And if you're feinting well, you're ideally not engaging, but making the opponent think you are. You can't counter a feint. It's swing and air, which is what you're trying to get them to do. So that either you counter their swing and air, or they stop trying to counter, or they slow down when they do try and counter. Take their finger off the trigger a little bit. The thing is, partly it's recognition. Sparring with better and better quality strikers is going to help strikers recognize what's a feint and what's not. The other thing is that it's very hard to be convincing over the course of a fight. Once you've started to, not consciously understand someone's tells, but once you start to pick up on what they're doing, it's very, very hard to make a strike look exactly like a feint. And you will see dudes do things on their real strikes that they won't do on their fake strikes. The really obvious ones are like gritting their teeth and things like that. People, if they're actually intending to step in, they do tense up in a different way to when they are just trying to get you to move. That's why, old school boxing coaches will have you stand in front of a mirror and work on your feints and try and convince yourself that you're coming at you. It's a tricky game. The thing about it is the more fighters do it, the better everyone gets. A rising tide raises all ships and all that stuff. But I was looking back at the Anderson Silva fights with Okami, and Okami literally, he was considered a good jabber at the time, and he's just standing there showing Silva that he's going to jab, and then he jabs, and then he stands there, and then he jabs. There's nothing between it to tell Silva, or to even make Silva think twice. Silva's just standing there waiting to counter jab, and it's really strange that we used to think that was really good striking. But that's how far this sport's come, and I'm really glad about it. Anyway, I'm going to have to do all the... we were supposed to have 2 loads of plugs today, but I'm going to do the one. If you haven't signed up to the Patreon, this week I will be recording the episode and publishing the episode on Pride Bushido 9, the Pride Lightweight Grand Prix, and of course the end of the Grand Prix. So it's over 2 events really, but that's the rise of Takanori Gomi, the unexpected return to form of Hayato Sakurai, who was working with Matt Hume at the time, who you may know from Making Demetrius Johnson, and Kawajiri, and there's a lot of other fun stuff going on in there, and there's obviously the other fights on both those cards. There's a few storylines to talk about, but I love doing these Pride events because we are removed enough from it now that it's history, and you get to review fighters who just, Takanori Gomi is the definition of has-been at this point, but back in the day, he was incredible. And if you haven't bookmarked so get on the Patreon first, but if you haven't bookmarked fightprimer.com, I'm trying to put out more content there, and I'm also linking to everything I do. So if you're struggling to find my stuff, because I've got about 4 Vice profiles for some reason, I will be linking it all on fightprimer.com. Also, I will be putting up the occasional GIFs to illustrate my points on these podcasts. If you have a question for the podcast, send it to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't bought Notorious, buy Notorious. I'm your boy Jack Slack. That was a phenomenal weekend of fights. It looks like we've got another one lined up. So I'll catch you next week. And cheers. And cheers. And cheers. And cheers. And cheers. And cheers. And cheers.